In Paul's 7 authentic letters, he understood himself as a holy person, called by the God of Israel to a specific task. Anthropologists have called such a person a shaman. The phenomenon of a holy person is found in all cultures throughout the world. Israelites in the first century are no different. They had their holy persons, and Paul was one. Anthropologists discern these 6 steps to becoming a shaman. Step number 1. A spirit must contact the candidate to possess him or adopt him. Paul believed that the God of Israel selected him already from his conception. With allusions to Isaiah and Jeremiah, Paul situated himself in the prophetic line and understood himself to have been selected for a prophetic ministry, just as those prophets had been. Step number 2 in becoming a shaman is that the possessing spirit or the adopting spirit must identify itself. It's very clear in some of the opening greetings of his letters that Paul understood that it was indeed the God of Israel who selected him for his ministry. Step number 3 is that the shaman must acquire the necessary ritual skills. Where and how did Paul learn to be a holy man? Certainly in part from his heritage as a Pharisee, who were themselves shamanic. 2 kinds of holy people existed in the Israelite tradition, the Zaddik and the Chazid. The Zaddik was one who sought to please God by keeping all the commandments. Pharisees identified 613, whereas the Chazid sought to go beyond that. Paul appears to have included himself in the first category, Zaddik, and quite likely the second also. Step 4, the holy man must be tutored by both a spirit in alternate reality and a human teacher in consensus reality. Paul declared his independence of all human counsel. He does, however, admit that he spent 15 days with Cephas, himself a holy man by Israelite reckoning. The role of Ananias and Barnabas is open to similar interpretation. Was Paul tutored from these holy men? Did they teach Paul anything? Or did they rather confirm what Paul insisted on in his letters, that God alone was Paul's teacher? The author we know as Luke appears to confirm this view when he reports that the Spirit selected Barnabas and Paul for special ministry. The shaman Paul's spirit guide or teacher is none other than the God of Israel. Paul is convinced that God personally disclosed the significance of Jesus to him. Paul does not relate the nature of that contact or that revelation. It may be similar to what Luke describes in the book we call Acts, or it may have happened quite differently. Remember, the anonymous author we call Luke is not writing 21st century Western biographies. Clearly, it was God who was Paul's primary instructor. Step 5 in becoming a shaman is that the holy person must grow familiar with the possessing or adopting spirit. In his communication with the Jesus group at Corinth, Paul refers to his abundance of revelations. This letter of 2 Corinthians is dated to around 57 Common Era. That's roughly 23 years after his own call and commissioning in 34 Common Era. That means Paul has had at least that many years of experience, thus a growing familiarity with God and others in the realm of God. Step 6 is that shamans must have ongoing trance experiences. As just indicated, Paul refers to an abundance of revelations in 2 Corinthians 12 verse 7, not to mention sky journeys, that is, trips into the realm of God with feet planted firmly on the ground, a common and documented experience of holy persons in all cultures. These experiences are, of course, altered states of consciousness. Indeed, the author of the book of Revelation, John the Seer, explicitly admits that he took such journeys to the realm of God and other places from which he could see the cosmos from God's vantage point. The event traditionally described as the conversion of Paul is more appropriately identified as the call of Paul, or the commissioning of Paul by God to complete a certain task. Paul did not convert from Judaism to Christianity, since the latter did not yet exist, and wouldn't so till 325 Common Era. Rather, Paul learned that the God of Israel had done something new in Jesus of Nazareth, and God called Paul to communicate that to fellow Israelites, especially those living among non-Israelite people. The reports of Luke seem to place Paul on par with eyewitness companions of Jesus, that is, the apostles. But what about Paul himself? Well, Paul seems to understand and locate himself in the context of the Israelite prophets, holy men selected by God for specific tasks.